There's so many things that I could share. If there was one, like for someone who's just getting started, um, I think that there's something around figuring out what your purpose is from their identity as being in the service.
Hey, welcome to the Leadership Loading Podcast. I'm Jason McClaren.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me on. My name is Ryan Micheletti. I'm head of global operations for the Founder Institute, and I'm a venture capitalist at the Veteran Fund.
Definitely. Hey, Ryan, thanks for coming on the show. I know we're going to get into your background a little bit and what you guys are doing over there at the fund, and then talk about some of your history. I know. So let's start talking about what you did before you went in the military and what led you to join the
Yeah.
military.
I mean, I've always been very patriotic, especially post 9/11. I was a freshman in high school when that happened. And so I always had the itch to serve our country. I was going to school before I joined, and I had a really strong urge to serve our country. And so when I enlisted, I would serve 6 years in the California Guard. I was enlisted as a NCO for a search and rescue and emergency communications unit. We were attached to the 1113th Transportation Company, which is a logistics unit in the Army National Guard. Our mission was emergency response to natural and man-made disasters. So, for example, like the fires that are going down in LA, earthquakes, nuclear response. We were trained in hazmat and rad nuke. And so our goal was really to be able to take the lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina, where there were massive communication issues. There was problems with agencies, interoperating and being able to communicate with each other, and sort of fix that through setting up these like emergency communication abilities. So we worked with both FEMA, work with state and local resources, as well as the Army National Guard.
Good deal. So when you were in the Guard, were you working full time also?
I'm thinking back. So yeah, I was working full time. In fact, I was a little bit of background here. So I was born and raised in the Bay Area. And I knew that I wanted to be on the forefront of what was happening in innovation and tech. And in order to do that, I felt like I needed to jump into the startup world. So actually, the first startup I joined, it was my chief warrant officer who kind of wrote me into it. His name was Spiro Matsanis. And he told me about a startup he was working on. He, had a pretty good network and brought in some really good team members to help build it. And I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. And so I started working with him, without, I didn't have any job. I wasn't supporting myself through any means other than just working with him. And I did the starving entrepreneur thing for about 4 years, and I worked across a bunch of different companies. And so, but that was really my first taste in entrepreneurship, and I was immediately hooked. Through that process, my brother and I started a security company called Shield Core Security and grew it to the second largest veteran-owned business in the Bay Area. And so think physical security guards. We started off doing bars and nightclubs because we thought that would be really fun and cool, and it's what you do in your 20s. And it's still operating today. My brother runs that full time. So I think, and I'm focused on some of my other companies and businesses, but I still have my big toe there. And so we built this security company. And my passion had always been in tech entrepreneurship, going back to that startup company. But what I realized is that there was no veteran tech ecosystem because everyone was off fighting a war. I thought, well, why isn't there a place where veterans can come and build and learn from mentors and build their startups? So we started VetTech, which was the very first military veteran startup accelerator based here in the Bay Area at a place called the Plug and Play Tech Center. Plug and Play is another like massive, and we use that as our engine to help bring in veterans from all over the US to come to Plug and Play, come to Silicon Valley to pitch for investment capital, connecting them to investors, securing corporate partnerships, and really just getting the mentorship that they needed to build a startup. So we started working with a few companies here, a few companies there. You built a portfolio of startups. And then in 2015, a few years later, I had the opportunity to take the work I was doing at VetTech and join the Founder Institute as head of operations to essentially, give me another global platform to help veterans at scale. And so I started working full time for the Founder Institute. leading their operations team and working with startups and startup leaders in over 200 cities around the world. So when I joined, we were at, I think it was like 40 cities and maybe just under 1,000 startups in our portfolio. Fast forward 10 years later, we now have 8,000 startups in our portfolio across 200 cities with a massive mentor network of 35,000 mentors. And so, being in that role, I not only worked with a lot of these startup ecosystem leaders, helping them run accelerator programs, startup ecosystems from Kabul, Afghanistan to Kazakhstan, and of course, LA, New York, Sao Paulo, Lagos, many different ecosystems. And so it was a really interesting role, but I was also working with startups too, working with hundreds of startups and founders over the period of that 10 years. And I got to know the pre-seed and seed startup ecosystem very well. And of course, but my core passion was helping the veteran startup ecosystem. So I wanted to make sure that I was bringing in veterans to the Founder Institute, and we launched something called the Veteran Founder Initiative. And then it quickly grew. So we launched a couple custom programs to help veterans build their startups. And then fast forward to 2021, one of our portfolio companies, led by an Air Force veteran named Mike Frazier, he sold his company. It was a portfolio company of Founder Institute and Vet Tech, the accelerator. And that kind of gave us a pause to say, okay, well, Mike's exiting his company. What do we want to do next? And Mike was instrumental. He basically wanted to come back and reinvest and serve the veteran community again. And that's something that we had seen time and time again. It's part of who we are. And we came up with the model of, okay, well, let's create a venture capital firm to invest in veteran-led technology companies. And that was really the birth or the genesis of the Veteran Fund. So I know I threw like my entire history and like 10 years of lots of things there. So let me pause here and see if you have any areas you want to dive into more.
No, that's awesome. I think I like what you guys did with kind of starting with something you knew, like the security and safety side. Probably wasn't very capital intensive to start that organization or that first business. And then, of course, you built off of that and now have leveraged that to get all these startups over there. Is that kind of accurate what you guys did?
Yeah, exactly. In the first, before we started the security company, I mean, I was just, I was a kid wandering around Silicon Valley, like working with companies and trying to like figure it out. So those were my starving entrepreneur days where I had the freedom to learn. And it's kind of like you go back and you hear some folks talk about like, hey, just go work for someone for free and figure it out and like learn the skill sets. But it's not just learning the skill sets, it's also building your network. And so even though that time was pretty rough, right? Trying to save up for a wedding ring and doing all that when you don't necessarily have like a full-time income. It's challenging, but I go back and I say I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't done that. And so I kind of followed my gut and just started working hard and meeting people and building the life that I wanted. And now, I wouldn't change it for the world. I will say though, one of the lessons I learned along the way is I got swept up in okay, like you can sell your company for $1 billion. Like, isn't that great? But that takes 10 plus years. The failure rate is extremely high in tech entrepreneurship. And so I started, building this equity portfolio. Today, I've got over 700 startups in my personal portfolio that have raised over $300 million. Back then, it was like, one company here, one company there. And I kind of went for like, how do we like get the big exits? How do we build towards that? When in the beginning, what I should have been doing is building towards cash flow. And that's kind of what I realized with the security company, which is it was a relatively easy business, like straightforward business model that could generate revenue that could then sustain me for what I actually was passionate about, which was working with veteran-led technology companies. So I would go for cash flow first, big exit and payout second.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, now you're able to do what you want to do. I think that's a good lesson for all the listeners that are looking to start a business. Pay the bills first, right? Get something that's low barrier to entry, that's easy to operate, build up that cash flow, and then you can exit and and start doing what you love. I know I started as, a auto detailing shop because that's what I did. I was a firefighter in the military and we had to keep all our equipment clean. And so I was used to detailing all the fire trucks and stuff. So that's what I started with. And then, I've worked on other things since then. And then now we've got Go Heroes, which is the producer for this podcast. And we kind of just go from there.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And also it takes a long time, right? It's like or what do they say? It's a marathon at a sprint's pace, right? And so it's like just realize like you're building for the long term and it's going to take a couple years to build it up and you just pay your dues and you do it, right? But one thing is absolutely for sure is that if you put your time and energy into something, it will grow. And so you just kind of have to take the leap of faith, throw a bunch of money into the business, right? But figure out like what's an easy way to get started and then just continue putting your time and energy into it. And eventually it will grow and balloon into what you want it to be.
So the Veteran Fund, can you tell us more about that and how, if someone's interested in contacting you guys, what would they start with?
So the Veteran Fund is an early stage venture capital firm that invests in critical technology companies with veterans on the leadership team. And so everyone, there's this big, when we started in 2021, it was right before as it is today. But what we found is that when you take the leadership skills of a veteran, right, and you also have either the veteran or a co-founder with deep domain expertise in the area that they're solving for. And when you look at the failure rate of startups, the number one reason why companies fail is because the founder gives up. Maybe you have to pivot, maybe you run out of money. At the end of the day, it's when the founder gives up. And what we found is our portfolio is thriving right now. And a lot of our founders have grown incredible businesses ranging from cybersecurity to drones to nuclear fusion, you name it. We have some really interesting companies. We have a company that landed on the moon last year. And so the Veteran Fund really focuses on that critical technology piece. So the White House actually came out and said, "Hey, here are the 14 critical technologies that are important." But when we started the fund, all of us had successful backgrounds in businesses. We didn't necessarily need to start the fund from like a financial perspective, but at the same time, like we needed to start the fund because it's something that we're all very passionate about and we have so much fun doing it, that you kind of know, like you get these kind of signs from the universe that you're on the right path. And like it was just the way that things came together, for us. For anyone here who's building technology startups, and if you have a veteran on the leadership team, then the Veteran Fund could be a good fit for you. We do specifically focus on those critical technology areas. And so you could be a veteran or a military spouse. And maybe you're just starting out, maybe you're not ready for venture capital, but you can go and join that accelerator for free, thanks to our partners at JP Morgan, to get the mentorship and build your network and get the structured processes on how to build a great startup at any point. And so you can put the link in the video notes, but it's fi.co/veteran. You can think of Founder Institute as almost like a startup boot camp. We put you through, 14 weeks of aggressive sprints and hitting milestones. And it's an incredible program that will transform your startup. And then, at that point, like you're going to have to go out and build your company, build your product, but you're able, when you're ready to raise capital, you can come to the Veteran Fund, or you could leverage, Founder Institute has some free postgraduate programs. One program I run is called Funding Lab, where we help you raise capital. Founder Institute also has an investor network called the FI Venture Network. So there's ways that we pair those companies who are raising capital that are portfolio companies to the Founder Institute Venture Network.
That's awesome. That's definitely what we're looking for with our listeners, and things that they can reach out for, and hopefully use those tools that they can get from you guys or from the organization. So Ryan, if you had one leadership tip for a new leader, I know you spit out a lot of information. If you had one, maybe you got an entrepreneur, maybe they don't qualify for you guys' services or the program there. What would be one tip you would give them?
Man, there's so many things that I could share. If there was one, like for someone who's just getting started, I think that there's something around figuring out what your purpose is from their identity as being in the service. And so you're kind of in this transition moment where like, okay, well, who am I now that I'm not in uniform? What is my mission? What am I supposed to do? And I believe everyone has incredible potential that can be unlocked. But the most important thing you have to do is figure out what is your purpose? Why are you here? And what are you supposed to be doing? And I do think like entrepreneurship is a great way to do that. Now, when we started the security company, I didn't necessarily think like, oh, my purpose is to become a security company executive and mogul. Like, in fact, like, it was the opposite. I needed to get started somewhere. And that allowed me to kind of build, get some momentum and build on top of it, which allowed me to do the other things that I'm really passionate about, which is really helping veteran startup leaders. And so I think there's, if you're just coming out of the military, just get started with something. Make sure that you build sustainably, though. Some founders make the mistake of trying to go out and raise capital right away. That's what I did. That's why the company that my chief warrant officer and I started failed, because we thought we could just go out and raise $2 million, on a back of a napkin. And we ended up wasting a year of our life and all of these things when we just didn't understand the process. Build sustainably, get something that will generate revenue so you could live and be happy, but use the extra time to hustle and start building the life you want bit by bit. And if you compound that over time, you're going to have the life of your dreams and you're going to have some incredible outcomes.
That's awesome. And we'll, like you said earlier, we'll take the show notes or put the links to your site in the show notes below, and everybody can reach out there. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason. Appreciate you and what you're doing.
There are thousands of leadership and management podcasts to choose from. We're glad you chose the Leadership Loading Podcast, a Go Heroes production. If you'd like to support Go Heroes Inc., visit www.goheroes.org. And with that, it's time to wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We sincerely hope you liked it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Let's all grow together. Thanks for listening to the Leadership Loading Podcast. Leadership Inspired.